I'm Stephen Powell. I'm originally from Wales, and I'm an author who moved to Portugal, golly, more than 5 years ago now, and I live in the countryside in the eastern Algarve, and I am the latest guest on the podcast Portugal: The Simple Life.
Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal: The Simple Life. And I'm really delighted and excited to be joined here by Stephen Powell. Stephen, thank you for being on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you for the invitation, Dylan. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. I see you sitting outside in the garden, so it could be worse ways to spend a Friday morning.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sitting in the shade of a particularly big carob tree that is right by my house.
Beautiful. Stephen, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about you?
Sure. Well, I started life in Wales. I was born in Cardiff, now the capital, and most of my childhood was spent in Wales. And my big idea for what I would do professionally with my life when I was young was I wanted to become a professional actor,
Okay.
and had to acknowledge that I probably wasn't, quite good enough. I mean, I wasn't rubbish, but I decided that it was a pretty tough life being an actor, and that you had to be super talented. So that left me with I didn't professionally have any sort of plan B. So after university, I just spent a couple of years on the road, essentially, and that was in the Middle East, Africa, the Far East, and
Wow.
Australia.
Okay.
I was lucky. My father used to have he had a little civil engineering company, and when I needed money for my travels, I would be a brickies labourer for my father, or just a plain labourer. So that paid okay. And as I say, for 2 years I was a bum, but did get to see extensive parts of the world. And then the idea formed during those travels of journalism. Got back to Wales. That would have been 1973. Got a job as a freelance radio reporter with the BBC, and then got into Reuters, the news agency, as a graduate trainee, and then that began 27 years with Reuters, and I think that the time there broke down into about half of that time I was in London. When I joined Reuters, the headquarters of the agency was 85 Fleet Street. So there in the heart of British journalism. So half of the time was in London, and then the other half in different postings was went to a couple of places in Europe, West Africa, Brazil, Cyprus, and Singapore. And some of that time was being a reporter, and some of it was being a sub-editor, working on desks, editing other people's copy. And then at the tender age of 51, I took early retirement. I thought, I've been enjoying this, but 27 years is enough. And I went back to my Welsh roots and did a number of things in Wales, living on a farm on the slopes of a holy mountain called the Skirrid.
Okay.
And so that sort of, yeah. And then, when was it? A decade ago, I started to travel and write and do travel books. So that's
very good.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So I know you spent a bit of time in Brazil as well, and actually became fluent in the language, Brazilian Portuguese.
Yes, I mean, I spent nearly 5 years in Brazil.
Okay.
Reuters sent me as a correspondent to São Paulo, the economic capital of the country, and then I was made bureau chief for Brazil, running the three bureaus in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia. So that was a pretty long stint. I also, I got married in Brazil to a Brazilian woman. That did not endure, but it was part of learning Portuguese. So yeah, I mean, I consider that I'm fluent in Brazilian Portuguese. European Portuguese can sometimes be a bit challenging,
Yeah.
but I mean, I understand people generally, and one thing I did last year was I decided that Mozambique, former Portuguese colony, of course, was rather underreported. So I spent three months last year in Mozambique, and I've
Okay.
just finished putting together a manuscript on my travels there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, how did Portugal start? How did it start with the big walk? Was that your first
Yeah, I mean,
experience, or had you been here already?
I think I first went to Portugal way back in 1984 on a little holiday to Lisbon and Óbidos, and
Abidos. I'm
yeah,
3 minutes from Abidos Castle.
really, okay, oh,
Yeah, you know the big church outside of the castle. My
yeah,
my
yeah,
wife and I got married in that church,
oh,
so it's
fantastic,
my neighborhood.
right? No,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lovely part of Europe.
mm,
So, I mean, I suppose what I remember from that 1984 visit was that Lisbon felt so very different from the Lisbon of today that I barely recognized them as the same place.
I
The
can
the
imagine.
mood in Lisbon was very different. I mean, today, of course, it feels very cosmopolitan, linked to the world, huge amounts of traffic,
Terrible.
lots of different sorts of restaurants. Um, Lisbon in 1984 felt, by comparison with other European capitals, it to be frank, it sort of felt a little bit provincial almost. It didn't really have a buzz, um, but yeah, coming closer to the present. Um, After traveling in the Caucasus, I wrote a book about that, and once you've gone into print once, it's very difficult to say, okay, been there, done that, got my T-shirt, now I'll stop. So I was sort of, in my head looking for another idea, and Portugal came into my mind because, again, obviously speak the language. It's not a huge country, so I decided to walk the length of Portugal, regarding it in my head as like a journalistic assignment. My idea
Yeah,
was that I would do the walk, write the book, and go back to living in Wales, where I was in a beautiful little village in the Brecon Beacons National Park. Um, but I don't know. Somehow I had this feeling that life was almost too predictable in this little village,
I've
and
got you.
I don't know. Having had such a positive experience, finding the people so friendly, I decided to up sticks and move to the Algarve. So it was one of those classic things where it wasn't really a deliberate life plan. Once sets out with one plan and it gets changed.
Yeah, I was so going to ask you. So, when you decided to walk the length of Portugal
Yeah.
for this book, which I've got here,
Mm-hmm.
Walking Europe's Edge, Reflections on Portugal, your intention wasn't to move here; it was just to walk the length of Portugal and write the book.
Exactly. Yes,
Amazing.
I didn't really have any thought of moving at the outset, but then yeah, then my ideas changed. I mean, obviously, um, from where I live in the Algarve to my roots in the UK, it's it's not a huge distance. I'm whatever, a 30-minute taxi ride from Faro International Airport. My daughters, and I've got three daughters who live in London. If they want, they can, and of course they do come. It's not a big deal for them to get on a plane in one of London's airports and come here. It's a much bigger deal if you're, say, American and you come to Portugal. They've got a much bigger distance to go to get home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about that walk. The book is wonderful. Like I said to you off camera, I'm almost finished. And it was difficult to put down. A lot of it was for me familiarity, as well as learning a couple of things that I didn't know about, which is wonderful. As I told you, I've been here 16 years, so it's always good to learn something new about the country. How was, just a snapshot, I mean, how was that experience for you of walking? How long did it take you?
Well, I started in September 2018 and finished 6 months later, March 2019. So, I was walking during the cooler half of the year.
Yeah.
And what I did was, I was blogging as I walked. So I would be sitting in a hostel in one town, writing about another town that I was in the previous week, and I was accumulating sort of obviously new impressions all the time. And what I did was I sort of chunked it up into 3 sections. So I walked from the Spanish border to the Portuguese city of Braga, and then I took a bit of a rest, went back to Wales, so that I didn't have new impressions coming in. I could sort of catch up with myself. I then went back to Braga, did a second leg from Braga to Lisbon. Again, took a rest in Wales, and of course not of course, but the days were short then. It was January time, and then I went back to Lisbon and did the final leg, which was Lisbon through the Alentejo, through the Algarve to Sagres, which is where I finished.
Okay, so you did top right to bottom left.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
a diagonal line across. Yeah.
I think it would have been really tough to do it all as one long stint.
I can believe that. Yeah.
As I say, it wasn't my legs. I was lucky. I never had a single blister. It was my head. My head just needed a rest. I think it makes sense to blog as you walk, because you have that secure feeling of knowing that you're not going to lose your notes because quite a few people have copies of what you've written, and you're not faced with the task of starting from zero when you've actually finished the walk. So I think it made sense. It was mentally tiring, so that's how I did it. Three chunks.
Amazing. There's a few things that stood out for me in the book, and I'd like to just explore those a bit with you. One thing was I lost count of the amount of times that you mentioned somebody stopped to offer you a lift. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, yes, it was fairly frequent. It happened almost immediately. I'd sort of only just walked into Portugal. So I was walking from a village on the border, Rio de Honor, through like a conifer plantation. And in terms of walking, I don't know whether there's anything more boring than walking through conifers, because that's all you can see. There are no rolling hills. There are no pretty girls. There's nothing but conifers. And a guy stopped, in the middle of this tree plantation and offered me a lift. And I just thought, this is the devil tempting me,
Yeah.
So I said no. I told him I was walking to Sagres, and he just looked at me in disbelief, sort of said, Sagres? and and drove on. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say that generally I just met tremendous kindness all the time.
Yeah, we'll get into that because it is the stories and anecdotes are lovely. The other theme that came up for me, and which was very, very interesting and something I think a lot of people would be curious about, was there seems to be a very much a north and south, central to south divide in terms of development, in terms of what's happening in your interior villages. You spoke about how the northern interior villages were very, very quiet, average ages of 60 and up, and then that kind of changed as you hit Vizil, and then started going down. Tell us a bit about that because that's quite interesting.
Well, I mean, I would say that it's less of a north-south divide actually than a west-east divide.
Okay.
When I was in the town of Mertola in the Alentejo, one of the local politicians, the chap who was running Mertola at the time, he introduced me to the statistic that if you cut Portugal in half from north to south, 9 million people live in the western half, and 1 million people live in the eastern half.
Okay.
And this is, I mean, I again, this wasn't something that I had a conscious plan to do to write about the flight from the countryside, but just talking to Portuguese people, I realized that this is a central preoccupation in rural Portugal, particularly in the east, is the flight from the countryside. I mean, I realized immediately that because when I walked from Spain into Portugal, I was in this village, Rio de Honor, and there really were only old people, or people my age or older. I mean, like there was nobody under 60, and that's true in so many places in rural Portugal. And I talked to journalists, academics, politicians, and it was the theme that they always came back to. I realized that if you talk to a good Portuguese professional, as I say, be it in journalism, academia, politics, they always have, if they're in rural Portugal, they always know the population statistics. How many people were born, how many people die in a particular place, and it's again and again, more people are dying than are being born. And one of the great complaints of people in sort of eastern rural Portugal is that they hardly ever see children. They obviously they might see their grandchildren when they come to visit, but in terms of people actually living there, very often there aren't any children. And one example that struck me, I mentioned it in the book, when I went through the Algarve for a while. I was walking on the Via Algarviana, a long distance walking and cycling path. And I stopped in a village called Fornazinhas, and there was a couple from Lisbon who were running a bed and breakfast. They were what the Portuguese themselves call os novos rurais, the new rural ones. So in English we'd call it living the good life, So they had a little boy, Alexandre, who was 2, and the person in the village closest in age to him was 52.
My goodness. Okay.
Half a century of difference, So I mean, what I write is that in Portugal, you've got to be really tough to live the good life. If you decide that for you that means living in quite a remote village. So yeah, I mean, it's not a flight from the countryside and falling populations it's not a sexy thing to write about. But I thought,
but it's fascinating. It's interesting.
But I mean, you've got to be, so much is in the route that you choose. I thought it would be sort of silly to just follow the coast and talk about parts of Portugal that, lots of people know because they've come here for holidays and they've checked into a hotel in Vila Moura or Porto or Lisbon or whatever. So I deliberately chose to stay away from the parts of the country that tourists go to. And then, to be honest, I had to report on the demographic
Of course.
questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like in the Alentejo, I talked, for example, to a woman professor in Évora, Aurora Carapinha, and her summary, which I then put as a chapter title, "Somos pocos y velhos." We are few and
And
old.
old. Yeah.
And in the Alentejo, she said three out of five people are over 65. So there is, and she argued that Portugal, although it's a rural country, isn't really an agricultural country. I think she was perhaps one could say exaggerating a bit for effect. I mean, we all know that Portugal produces wine. We can see that every time we go to a supermarket.
Produces a lot of things, yeah.
Yeah. It does have products that come from the earth, but the direction of travel has been that the Portuguese are leaving the countryside. I mean, I live in a quiet little country lane, 7 kilometers from Tavira. Tavira is a very pretty town on the East Algarve coast. So I regard myself as being in probably quite a typical rural lane. If I turn left and go up the lane, in the first house I come to, there is a British couple. If I go a little further up the lane, on the right-hand side of the road, there is a second British couple, and over slightly off the lane to the left, there is a third British couple. A bit further along, there are two ladies from Switzerland, and so it goes. You know, the Portuguese who used to be in the countryside
Are no longer.
are no longer here.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other thing that I really enjoyed about the book, Stephen, is you've kind of you dissected a couple of, what's the best way to say it? You discovered the real Portugal on your walk. You know, you didn't, like you mentioned, you didn't just go down the coastal cities. You obviously had to go through Lisbon, Coimbra, which people know quite well, but you spoke about Lamego, you spoke about Santarém. These are places that are a little bit off the beaten track. What was your experience of kind of, and you would always go to cafes, you were always in Tascas, you were seeing Portugal at its true sense. What was your experience of doing that? What did you learn about the country by being in those more authentic places?
Well, I suppose there will be more than one aspect, but I do remember writing about you know, beauty alongside decay. Was sort of
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah. So one example would be Beja.
Okay.
Beja, typically for Portugal, you know, has a beautiful medieval castle, and it has sort of lots and lots of character. At the same time, it's kind of underfunded, and people I sense had moved away. You know, you walk through some of the little pedestrian streets in the centre of Beja, and there isn't really any life. I mean, I was told that people had moved to other homes, you know, just outside town, but it's this mix of sort of beauty on the one hand, but like a sort of almost a sensation of hanging on by its fingernails at the same time, and the people like not always being there anymore. I mean, I get the sense, because I recently sort of revisited some of the places I went to. I have a sense of kind of money now sort of flowing in more, perhaps, partly in terms of like projects. So to give one example, I start the book with the little story of Aristides, the Sousa Mendes,
Yep.
the Portuguese
That was
diplomat.
that was incredible. I didn't know that about this guy at all, and
Right.
I love my history. This
Uh-huh.
guy who helped Jewish people get out of Nazi Europe and against the orders of the authorities. It's incredible, incredible.
Yeah, no,
I
it's
didn't know about this guy.
no, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a certain number of Portuguese who don't know about him. Obviously,
Yeah.
he became like a non-person in Salazar's Portugal. So this is like one little happy story of funding coming in, and like it is. I walked past his home when I did my walk, so that was in 2018, and it was all shut up, and I could see online that there was a project to open a museum there, but when I walked past, it was all closed. Anyway, I just recently, with my Italian companion Carla, we did a road trip just very recently, and one of the things we did was we went to the old family home of Aristides de Sousa Mendes, which is, sorry, it's a few kilometers south of Viseu, and it is now an absolutely first-rate museum. I mean, it's really, really excellent.
Mm.
So nobody really knows how many visas he gave to Jews and others fleeing from Nazi-occupied Europe. The,
Amazing.
the the little statue in Bordeaux where he was consul credits him with giving 30,000 visas. That might be an exaggeration, nobody knows for certain. But one of the things they have in this newly opened museum is on the walls, they have in alphabetical order the names of 14,000 people who got
Wow.
visas. Yeah, and you really
Wow.
get a sense. You get a sense of the family home, and a very powerful sense of how Aristides de Sousa Mendes suffered personally because of his defiance of Salazar. So his pension was stopped, and Salazar banned him from practicing as a lawyer.
Wow.
So to survive, one thing he had to do was to sell like all of the furniture in the family home,
Oh, wow.
or pretty much all of it. So yeah, so that's one example of money coming into a project.
Between my job as a realtor at Portugal Realty and hosting this podcast, life is pretty busy. But lately I've been receiving so many messages from people that want to know more about buying property here on Portugal's Silver Coast that I've got to do something about it. So starting now, for subscribers only, I'm offering up a 30-minute session per day. That's 5 30-minute sessions for a one-on-one meeting to talk about buying property here on Portugal's beautiful Silver Coast. This is for subscribers only. So please subscribe to book your session and get in touch with us through the links below via WhatsApp or email to book your session today. I'll be happy to speak to you. It's for subscribers only and it's completely free. You have a little phrase at the beginning of the book, dedication to the warm-hearted people of Portugal who made me fall in love with the country. And there are beautiful stories in the book about people helping you along the way when you did this walk. The one that stuck out for me the most was where you couldn't find accommodation and you climbed in a car with two gentlemen and drove and drove and drove and eventually ended up in a priest's house.
Right, right.
There's not many places in the world where this happens.
No.
And we're not talking about 30 years ago. We're talking about 2018.
Yeah.
Amazing. Tell us about what struck you about the people here.
Well, I think it's one of those things that is very, very difficult to analyze, but the Portuguese seem to have retained an ability to sort of to be with you and to hold a conversation that can be broad. I mean, I think partly in terms of, say, restaurants. So if I'm in Britain, my sense is that if you're talking to the waiter, there's like an unwritten rule that your conversation with the waiter has to be about food, or something allied to the food business. But in Portugal, that sort of unwritten rule doesn't seem to apply. You can have a broader conversation with the waiter or the innkeeper, and you typically learn something about their life, which is, I mean, it's not impossible in Britain. I mean, I don't want to be too dogmatic about this, but it's much more common in Portugal to have a conversation with somebody whom you meet in that sort of professional context, and you learn about their lives. So again, on this road trip that I've just done, we stayed in a place very, very close to the Douro Valley, and the chap who ran it, after we finished our dinner, he came and he chatted, and we learned that he had spent I think it was 31 years living in Switzerland, and now he'd come back to roots, opened this very attractive sort of bed and breakfast in what is obviously a prime tourism country, the Douro, and we got a real sense of the man, and I mean the place. It was super interesting because he spent all these years in Switzerland, and it seemed as if some of Switzerland had sort of rubbed off on him. The place was very, very clean, very, very organized,
Efficient.
and at the same time, like the Portuguese warmth was there. So it was like an interesting amalgam.
Combination, yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing that's happening is, Portuguese are going abroad to work, make money, and come back. Then they're not abandoning their roots. And what it is that's drawing foreigners to Portugal, I think includes some things that are super obvious, like the beautiful sunny weather, and the slow rhythm of life. So there are the things that are really, really clear, and then there's something which is kind of in the air and is super difficult to define. And sometimes you get theories which are sort of way out there. I mean, towards the end of my book on Portugal, I mentioned a conversation that I had on a train in the Algarve with a chap called Fahmi, who had roots in North Africa, and he was on a train journey to the Western Algarve, and he wanted to set up some sort of commune, with yurts and what have you. He was a man with a very sort of strong, grounded personality, and he regaled me with the theory that if you go back to the time of Pangaea, when there was one supercontinent which broke up, I think, about 200 million, 175 million years ago, that Portugal was pretty much in the heart of Pangaea. There are maps online where Pangaea, superimposed on Pangaea, are the names of current countries. So Portugal was sort of tucked in at the southern, right by the southern tip of Greenland. Yeah, so it was pretty much in the middle. And Fahmi sort of entertained the view that its position in Pangaea had given it a particularly powerful healing energy. Now, I'm not asking your listeners to buy into this. I'm giving it as an example of one person's attempt to
decipher.
Yeah, but the people do come here, and they're coming from lots of different places,
Yeah.
And I don't have a definitive view, but I think there's a sort of there seems to be some sort of spiritual quality in the air in Portugal, which is a draw.
Have you been to Cromulus, the Amendiga, I think it is? They're like the Portuguese Stonehenge.
Yeah, what near Evora?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That's an interesting place because that was we've had the lady who's one of the architects, not so archaeologists there
Right.
on the podcast, Sita, and she spoke about how this place was a gathering place. It was a place where at any given moment there were people from all over the world bartering, trading, and then there's the mysterious part of it, which is the rocks are aligned with the stars. And if you were there at certain times of the year, there were magical healing elements. So it's a little bit of everything combined, which is super interesting.
Yes, I mean, I found the place, very, very atmospheric. I mean, I got myself a guide and a driver because it is out in the countryside. If you
Yeah,
don't,
you got to track. It's difficult to find, and it shouldn't be difficult to find because it's interesting.
yeah, I mean, there's more than one site. I
There's
mean,
a whole bunch of them. Yeah,
I went to the main one, and yeah, I found it very, very impressive. I would certainly urge anybody who has
yeah,
planned a trip to the Evora area to go and see them. It's
yeah.
interesting to hear what your interviewee had to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you the interview because it's really really good. Um, I there's something else that you mentioned in the book, which I've always said Portuguese are very generous with their time. They're always happy to have a chat, a conversation. But you mentioned something else, which kind of was a penny drop light bulb moment, that they're good listeners.
Yeah.
And I was like, they really, really are. Like they're
Yes.
amazing. And but you said you couldn't figure out why. Have you figured out why?
No, I think they just, I mean, they give themselves permission to not feel rushed because it's so much in the frame of mind that the person is in. Um, in like in Northern Europe, for example, I was recently in The Hague in the Netherlands, and it was official policy in the bistro where I had lunch that you were not allowed to sit at the table for more than 90 minutes. After 90 minutes, you're politely thrown out. Well, if you have a rule like that, I mean, you can't have good listening by the waiter. It's impossible because they're setting these time boundaries. But I've never come across a place in Portugal that does that. And then in other social contexts, yeah, they're also good listeners. And yeah, the only experience I have is that they give themselves permission to focus on you. And
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
I also something else that I resonated with is your experience of Fatima. I didn't get it the first time,
Hmm.
maybe not even the second or the third time. I was just like, this place is huge.
Yes, it
It's
is.
overwhelming. What's the deal here? Having now lived here for longer, my wife is Portuguese, speaking to more Portuguese people, seeing how they kind of access the place. It's different. Like, and I'm not a religious person,
Hmm.
but yeah, I very much resonated with your initial. What the hell is this? Like, what's going on here? It is that kind of experience. The thing that I always kept coming back to was I don't know if you saw in Fatima they have the place for the candles where you can
Yes.
buy a candle and then go and say a prayer, but you put the money down, and I'm thinking there's a vault underneath here with coins, like, and how much is down there? It must be insane. But that was my skeptical side thinking a bit deeper. But yeah.
Right, right. No, I mean it's yes. I mean it's obviously the case that a church which has 1.4 billion members is going to have a very a very distinct energy about it. And if you have
Yeah.
thousands and thousands and thousands of people from this one church in one place, and you're not yourself a member of that community, it's going to feel
Yeah.
there is you here, and there are all of these pilgrims sort of there, and even like linguistically, it was challenging because,
Mm.
I mean, suddenly in terms of who's there, who's around you, you're not in
Oh,
Portugal anymore.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's insane.
I mean, I was in a hotel where everybody else except me seemed to be Spanish, and it was largely women, so it was Spanish women going yakety yak in Spanish all around me, and I didn't feel that I was in Portugal anymore. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I went, but it was, yeah,
Strange.
it was different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You've done this walk. I mean, we could talk for ages about it. But you've done this walk, and then you've decided, I want to live here.
Yeah.
How did you? Why? How did you come to that decision?
Well, I think it's difficult to coldly analyze all the aspects. I mentioned this in one other podcast that I hadn't been very happy about the Brexit vote, so I was immediately taken to task. So that's part of my truth. I mean, I feel myself to be European. I like the European values here. I mean, I'm still deeply in love with Wales, and I can go back there whenever I want. But I do also like to be in a country which is trying to be actively part of the European project. That was one thing in my thinking. I like to have a little bit of land. It was easier, financially easier for me in Portugal to buy a little bit
Sure.
of land, and I have that I would have been able to do in Wales. So I have a little vineyard here with 100 vines. I have a little orchard with oranges and lemons, and I mean the whole the climate is super important because it just does so much to shape the way one lives. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was very lucky. My parents sent me off 3 times to France on exchange holidays, and I
Mm.
had that whole experience of being, on the French Riviera, having lunch in the garden, sitting outside, and here in Portugal, one of my daughters and her husband, he is now, came for Christmas, and on Christmas Day we had our Christmas meal sitting outside on the terrace. Um,
Wonderful. Yeah.
I mean, you can't do that in Wales, and I think I mentioned very, very briefly one of my postings was to Cyprus. There in Cyprus, I was in rented accommodation that had a little garden, and there were vines there, and I really loved, using the vines to cook, so making stuffed vine leaves. But here with the vineyard, I mean, I can do that. So fragments from your past, things you really enjoyed, can come together quite powerfully and point you in a certain direction. I think I just I love going out, picking the vines, and then cooking them up and giving them to friends. That's something that for me is sort of life enhancing.
Yeah. Uh, what do you want to say? We've touched on it, but what do you think people should know about the Portuguese people? Because they're a big reason you're here as well. Um, what should people know about the Portuguese?
Well, I think that they are, they are very family oriented, and typically they will have their sort of life in terms of human connections already set up. They will have their aunts and their uncles and their close pals and what have you, and so going to be largely sort of self-sufficient in terms of who they spend time with, and particularly where I live in the Algarve, the place is just abuzz with foreigners who are wanting to make new connections. So that if you go to something that's been organized, perhaps let's say I go twice a week to Tai Chi classes, which I greatly enjoy. But like there are typically 30 of us in on a given Saturday, say doing Tai Chi. There's one token Portuguese person. The rest of us are Europeans of different kinds. The teacher is from Missouri, so like the path of least resistance socially, at least in the Algarve, will take you away from the Portuguese, perhaps. Yeah, partly because they already have their lives, and partly because, as I say, the people who want to be sociable and meet new people are all the other foreigners. So that one has to make a certain effort, to check out, well, which because like you take something like, say, yoga, there will be groups where everything is happening in English and other groups where everything is happening in Portuguese. So you'd have to kind of consciously check out, well, which are the yoga groups which function in Portuguese. Yeah. So I mean, they're super friendly, but you're not going to naturally come across them, even as I mentioned before, 3 British couples just up my lane.
Yeah.
They're very friendly, but there is a whole piece around conscious strategy to interact with Portuguese beyond saying hello to the woman who's at the supermarket checkout.
Yeah.
Other parts of Portugal, very, very different story. If somebody settled in, say, Viseu, there are Portuguese people there. So it depends so much on where you go.
Yeah, I mean, where I am, it's Portuguese. It's Portuguese, and
right.
One of the things that I always say to people, and I see it's sort of something that, whether you did it deliberately or not in your book, when you made the effort to go and talk to people, you made the effort to ask questions, you were curious, you were brave, you spoke the language, even if it was Brazilian, didn't matter. They were happy that you tried. You mentioned that in the book as well. And It was the same for me when I came here. I was like, I don't care if I sound like a 6-year-old. I'm going to speak Portuguese, and I'm going to go to the place where the Portuguese go, and I'm not just going to stay in my expat bubble. And it changed everything. But I was able to do that here because there is that community, which is, so there are parts of the country where you can really plug in, and they're happy. They're happy for you to join. They're happy for you to be a part of what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think I've come across, you mentioned it yourself just now, how appreciative they are when you speak Portuguese. And I don't think I have ever been to a country where people are more generous in terms of how they praise you if you talk to them in Portuguese. It's something very, very striking about the country. And it's not even as if the language is in any difficulty. I mean, one of the remarkable things in the whole of language history, of course, is that Portugal, which at the time of the age of discoveries perhaps had about 1.5 million people, its language is now the most widely spoken tongue in the southern hemisphere, which is just stunning. So their language is not in danger, quite the contrary, but they are very appreciative, and that's very touching.
Yeah, very much so. Stephen, what is one thing that you would like people to remember and to take away from our conversation, if possible? One thing.
Okay. I suppose, well, the main thing would be that here I am, in my case, a Welsh patriot, sitting very happily in a garden in Portugal, where I live, and have a good life, and have retained, I hope, my links to my old country. Both family and friends come and see me. So I'm just one of the many people who have voluntarily moved from one country to another, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So I suppose
Wonderful.
that's the main thing.
Yeah, but you said something interesting, and I think this is important. You weren't unhappy in Wales. You came to
No,
Portugal because you wanted to try this place, and I think that's really important, because I think if people are unhappy in a place and they think that by moving it's going to solve all of their problems, it doesn't work out, and that ends up being a difficult transition and a difficult experience. But you were not unhappy in Wales, but
no,
there was
I
something
wasn't.
that drew you here, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
right. No, I wasn't. I wasn't sort of actively unhappy. I mean, I suppose I thought partly in terms of if I move, I give myself a different geographical hinterland. The places, the countries that will be close to my new home. I mean, that whole philosophy was rather tested by COVID, because
Oh yes,
I
yeah,
moved to Portugal.
2019. Yeah,
Yeah, I came to Portugal in um, December 2019,
yeah,
and I quite literally had time to find an apartment and buy a bed, and a couple of chairs, and boom, the shops, etc., were just
lockdown. Yeah,
they were closed, and I wasn't able to to meet anybody. So for the first few months, I had a rather unusual life, living in a strange land, and not knowing anybody. So you find your own strategies for doing that. I talked regularly every week to my daughters on Zoom or whatever. But yeah, I mean that was partly in my head, a different hinterland, and finally I have been able to do things like go to Morocco, or trips to Spain. So now I am actively enjoying the new hinterland.
yeah. You also mentioned something at the beginning of our chat, where you said you liked where you lived in Wales, but there was a predictability.
Yeah.
There's nothing predictable here in Portugal. There's something wonderful or different every day.
Yes, I mean it's sort of throwing things up in the air and seeing where they land.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I mean
Good.
it feels right. I mean I feel in myself that I mustn't allow myself totally to kind of just go with the flow and mix, perhaps say, solely in expat circles. Um, there is a piece I have to sort of challenge myself and make new contacts. I mean when I was in Mozambique last year, I was really speaking Portuguese every day. you know
You have to, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, because not a lot of English spoken in Mozambique.
Hmm.
Um, Come back here, and the amount of Portuguese I'm speaking has sort of dropped dramatically. But yeah, that's a sort of little personal challenge for me.
Yeah, yeah. How can people follow you online? How can they get hold of your book? Tell us where people can reach out.
Yeah, certainly. Well, if people want to buy my book, it's on like all the main Amazon sites, for example. So just basically go to Amazon is the simplest way to do it. Um, Also, I have a website, which is stephenpowellauthor.com. My email is on there, and if somebody lives close to me here in the Algarve, I can easily get a book to them. Um, so that's how to buy the book. Um, but there was another part to your question, didn't I?
Yeah, just how people can follow you and reach
Oh
out.
well, yeah, they can. I do put some blogs up on my website. So that's the place to go. Or one word, stephenpowellauthor.com.
Perfect. Okay, I'll put some links in the show notes, so people can follow, can get in touch if they'd like to chat and get the book, because it's a great read. And there's not a lot of, because this is kind of not just a travel log, it's an insight into Portuguese culture. It's a lot of history as well, which is fascinating. So it's definitely worth the read if you want to get a bit more into the Portuguese of it all. But Stephen, a question that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Portugal, the simple life. Why? Yes, I mean, it's not always simple, of course. I mean, Portuguese bureaucracy can be far from simple. But it's values. It's values. I like. I mean, they don't have nuclear weapons. They do have wolves running wild. Some of the sort of fundamental things here, I am totally in sympathy with. It would be a very big deal in Britain to reintroduce wolves. I mean, Portugal hasn't had to reintroduce them; they've always been here. But there's a set of values which I like, and I've already mentioned the weather. It shapes how you live. You know, the outdoor life can be just so lovely. And I mean, one thing I do in the Algarve, I suppose this is simple. I just take bicycle rides through the salt flats by the sea. You can do, for the first year and a half in Portugal, I didn't have a car, and I sort of worked out routes where I'd sort of put my bike on the train, take it from one place to another, and then perhaps cycle back. So that's like that's the simple life, in the sense that you don't have to have big bucks to have a bicycle and buy a train ticket. Like at my age, you get a 50% discount.
That's right. So, pensions discount. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there are nice things that one can do on a simple budget. So yeah, I suppose that would be.
I like it. I like it, Stephen. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. We could have spoken for a lot longer, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the book. Thank you. Or as we say in Welsh, diolch.
Diolch, yes. And then you can say diolch yn fawr, or diolch o galon is a nice phrase. Calon is heart. So diolch o galon is from the heart. Well, and
thank you.
And diolch o galon I ti. Thank you for the invitation, Dylan. I've enjoyed it.
You're welcome. I'm going to let you call it, Stephen.
That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to our guests, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal The Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to The Simple Life.